theme.
It's the theme. Yes, I'm going to get to that, Josh. Yes. So this is Pink Floyd's Animals. It comes in at number 9 in the 1970s on Best Ever Albums. Cracking the top 10. Number 2 in 1977. Number 36 of all time. It's Pink Floyd's 4th highest rated album on Best Ever Albums, and it's not on Rolling Stone's list. So this is their 10th studio album. It was recorded from April to December of 1976, and it was released on January 21st, 1977. It's actually going to turn 45 years old in about a week.
Wow.
So, yep. It sold pretty well, reached number 2 in the United Kingdom and number 3 in the United States. And yes, Josh, it is a concept album loosely based around George Orwell's novel Animal Farm. So sheep, dogs, and pigs, right?
Mm-hmm. I was wondering. Okay, that explains. Well, I don't know if it explains, but now I at least have a framework.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm pretty sure, like, say that Pink Floyd's album is going to be a concept album is kind of like it's of course it is, right?
Is wood or wet?
It's like Pink Floyd as a concept.
Exactly. So a couple interesting things about this album. This represented they had their contract with EMI Records, which had expired. And in that original contract, they had written in there that they would have unlimited use of the studio, which was really beneficial to a band like Pink Floyd, who spent a lot of time producing and writing and rehearsing and all that stuff. And they the EMI allowed them to do this because they gave them essentially reduced royalty rates on the album sales. But this contract expired, and so Pink Floyd wanted, in an effort to avoid costly time in the studio, they decided to mitigate those costs by building their own 3-story building, which would be kind of a hub for the band. And it essentially took almost the entirety of 1975 to build. And on the first floor of this 3-story building was the recording studio. And the second floor, it housed all of their touring equipment. And on the third floor, they had their offices and a billiard table. So they also thought that this would be a good idea so they could maybe make some extra money by renting out the recording studio to other artists. And
did they call it something?
They did not have Pink Floyd studio. I don't know. I don't think there was a clever name that came up. There was like the location and the former name of the building was on there, but I didn't write that down. So this album is notable for a couple of things, but one of the main things is that this is really Roger Waters, the bassist, asserting himself as being the one that's in full control of the band. And there was a couple reasons for this. Mainly, it was Roger Waters' just drive and determination to really propel the band. Guitarist David Gilmour, who did contribute some to this record, mostly in the song "Dogs." He wrote a lot of the music behind that. But he and his wife had recently had a child, so he was spending some time being a new father, and so didn't have enough time to devote to the band. The keyboardist Rick Wright didn't have any songwriting credits for the first time on any Pink Floyd album, and he didn't have a ton of ideas, and he was also dealing with his marriage, which was failing, so that kind of distracted him. He really wasn't in the creative spirit, I guess you could say. So Roger Waters really kind of takes this as kind of like his band, and that didn't really go over so well with everybody else, and this is kind of really the beginning of the fracture of what would eventually lead to the breakup of the band. Couple other things that were going on. Apparently there was a lot of stuff I read about the punk movement being, retaliating against bands like Pink Floyd who were seen as kind of like the establishment. And, this was one of the bands that they were rebelling against. But it was also kind of interesting because Roger Waters later said that he actually kind of was in line with a lot of the social and political messages of a lot of the punk bands, and it kind of was inspired a little bit by those, criticisms by punk bands about Pink Floyd to say, oh yeah, well we can be critical of things as well. We can really get into the politics of things as well. So that was part of the inspiration for this. Also interesting to point out, Nick Mason they weren't against punk. They were fine with it. Nick Mason actually produced the second album by the band, The Damned, Music for Pleasure. So that was produced by Nick Mason, which actually they were trying to get Syd Barrett to produce it, but he was so out of it that Nick Mason came in and said, said, I'll actually do it for you guys. Or maybe I think they went to him because they couldn't get Syd Barrett. But anyway, so Waters was definitely more of a socialist and felt that modern society was in decay and that capitalism was to blame. So he decides to borrow this concept from George Orwell. And, they had three main pieces of music in this album that included the pigs, who are the corrupt leaders, the dogs, the business-minded, people, or the dogs, and then the followers, or the sheep. And the end of the album ends with the sheep rising against the dogs and taking over them. So it was, I guess, positive in that regard. So the songs "Dogs" and "Sheep" were actually written before, and they were performed in part during the Dark Side of the Moon tour. And they were some songs originally considered for "Wish You Were Here," which was an album that we covered already. But they were shelved for that, so they didn't really feel that they fit in, but they were going to fit in with this. So since the songs were already recorded, they reworked the lyrics to go along with the concept, and then "Pigs," three different ones, was one of the main songs that was written specifically for the album. The song "Pigs on the Wing" was written as a glimmer of hope. It's noted for being one of the only songs that Roger Waters wrote that's considered a love song. He was writing it for his girlfriend, who was actually also the wife of the manager for the Grateful Dead. So, I think it sounded like they had a kid while she was still married to this Grateful Dead manager. So that was kind of interesting to find out. But "Pigs on the Wing" in particular, so it's a song that he wrote, that Waters wrote, and he decided it's just an acoustic song, and he decided that the album would be better if he split it up, and he did the first half at the very opening track, and he did the last track, the second part as the last track. And this caused some tension, guys, because Pink Floyd had an agreement with amongst the band that would determine who gets the royalties from the record. And it was basically whoever wrote the song or the primary songwriter would get the royalties for that. So "Pigs on the Wing," since it was two separate tracks, he got double the royalties for it, even though the song is not even 3 minutes long in its entirety. Yet David Gilmour wrote the majority of "Dogs," which is about 17 minutes long, and Roger Waters got more royalties for "Pigs on the Wing." So
socialism.
Yeah. Yes. Gilmour was not very happy about that, as you can imagine. So the Wright and Gilmour were kind of mixed on the album. Wright actually said he didn't like it very much. Gilmour's kind of mixed on it, saying it had some good parts, wasn't their strongest. Roger Waters describes it as saying it was violence tempered with sadness, and this is definitely an angry album. This is it's a little bit more of a raw Pink Floyd sound. It's not as atmospheric. It's more rocking, and it's definitely angry, for sure. The cover of the album was the Battersea Power Station, which was a facility that Waters would drive by from time to time. He just thought the image was really would be an interesting cover for the record. And he decides to get a pig to float above it. And so there's a couple of funny stories. One being, at one point, as they were shooting the photos for it, the pig got away, and they were supposed to be hiring a guy, like a marksman, to shoot the pig down in case it did get away, but they forgot to hire the marksman for this particular day. So the pig flies up in the air, and it causes all this commotion at Heathrow Airport, which had to ground some planes and stuff like that. So, but they also got free press for the album because it made all the papers, so that probably helped the sales of the record. The tour is also an interesting story. There's a bunch of interesting stories here, but I'm not going to go into all of it because some of it's going to blend into the next album, which is The Wall. But this tour was actually the first one that they had since Dark Side of the Moon. They did not tour after Wish You Were Here. So the set would be the first set would be performing the entirety of Animals. And the second set was them doing the entirety of Wish You Were Here. So it was a pretty big tour because Pink Floyd by this time was a very huge band. They used a lot of inflatables. Some of the critics felt that these inflatables distracted from the music itself. But Roger Waters was distant. He would arrive to the venues by himself. He'd leave almost immediately afterwards, wouldn't really socialize with the rest of the band at the after parties. And also there was tension because the wives or the wife of David Gilmour and the girlfriend of Roger Waters didn't get along. So this isn't a happy time for Pink Floyd, and the album kind of, I think, shows some of that, just with the overall energy behind it. And so, yeah, they want to stop it right there. But I think, John, you are up next to go over your take on Pink Floyd's Animals.
So I've mentioned a couple of times that I love the fact that we're doing like a journey in time to see the development of bands along the way. And I think I've shared that for a long time my view of Pink Floyd has been I use them a lot as a band that I don't like and I sort of don't get at different times. And I've kind of had that view challenged consistently in the time that we've done this, to the point where I'd say the vast majority of the Pink Floyd albums we've done have gone from I really liked it to at least I found it interesting. I think it was really only Metal that was an album that didn't really strike for me. Even the earlier ones. This is the first album, I think, where it fell into my stereotype of what I thought of Pink Floyd. It just sort of was there, is how I'd describe it. I couldn't connect with this album at all. I didn't... It kind of went, the lyrics, the sonic palette. Like I said, I knew it was a concept album. I couldn't for the life of me figure out what the concept was. Okay. Even with, I mean, I know Animal Farm very well. I think sonically I kind of get it, because like Matt said, I definitely was able to pick up that this was an angrier album. Although I thought Wish You Were Here, certainly from a lyrical standpoint, may not sonically have sounded like it, but you could tell there was undergirding anger in that album. But it certainly didn't spill out in terms of how it sounded. This was, and I made the mention earlier that when we were talking about the Eagles, I said, well, the Pink Floyd album kind of was at least nominally as heavy as that album was. And yeah, this one was guitar driven for sure. I don't know though, man. Like this era of Pink Floyd is like the area of Pink Floyd and the sound of Pink Floyd that I think I stereotype. It wasn't as interesting to me, and as certainly as Wish You Were Here was, or even Dark Side was, or even the earlier stuff like Saucer Full of Secrets were to me. It just it had that feeling you have where music washes over you, but it didn't wash over me like in a warm bathing or a sort of a take me to a different place, evoke a feeling. It just sort of was background music. This was the first Pink Floyd album that, as I would joke around with, I think that it would have probably been enhanced by substance use, because if there was another layer, I don't feel that I was ever able to evoke it. I have specific sonic things I want to talk about. I usually like to jump off Matt's reaction on that, because I know he digs into it a little bit, and I'm curious to see how he diagnoses it. But yeah, I was not a big fan of this one, guys, I have to say.
I am kind of lukewarm on this album. I didn't hate it, but I feel like there was something missing here. I do feel like what Matt said, it's kind of a piece. I thought it sounded sonically kind of similar to Wish You Were Here and Dark Side of the Moon. I think they still, kind of have that spacey feeling. They're incorporating the synth. They've got it's kind of it feels expansive. They're taking their time with the songs. They're kind of going into places, and it's kind of the same vibe as other Pink Floyd albums that I've got. I mean, for the life of me, you describing the concept of the album, I could not pick up on that. I mean, I was looking at the lyrics for Pigs, 3 different ones, and I couldn't figure out what they were talking about. So I'm glad you explained it to me. I mean, it makes sense in retrospect. I wonder if I don't know. Sometimes I feel like concepts are expanded on after the fact, or they make them, like you said, they make some of the music beforehand, and then they're kind of like shoehorning it into this concept. I'm not sure if that totally works as a concept or not. They still have the kind of, in the same vein as some of the prog rock we've talked about, there are long stretches of instrumentals. I feel like there's kind of movements within each of these songs, and so yeah, and then they're incorporating the animal sound effects as well throughout the the thing of the album. There's only, what, 4 songs on here?
I mean,
right?
they're 5.
5.
4, and 5 tracks, 4 separate songs, really.
So, unfortunately, I really liked the part of Pigs, what I guess it's the chorus where he goes, "Ha charade," which I didn't even know until I saw the lyrics that he was saying charade. I thought he was referring to a man named Sherrod or something. and I really liked that part. It sounded unusual. It stuck with me. But kind of the rest of the album blended together for me, unfortunately. I didn't hate it, but it really didn't grab me. And I didn't like it as much as Wish You Were Here, which, for the record, was my favorite Pink Floyd band or album thus far. And to be fair, Wish You Were Here is kind of different than the other rest of the Pink Floyd albums that we've heard. So I think it's thematically of a piece. There wasn't really instrumentally or sonically something that stuck out to me that didn't sound like something they've done before. So I guess I would classify this as kind of a middling Pink Floyd album. It doesn't seem like it has as strong of as much as me not liking Dark Side of the Moon. I feel like that did kind of have more of a statement to it and sounded different compared to kind of how this album does. So,
well, it sounded like the desolation and isolation and sort of, that feeling at times, which was kind of, I was able to pick up the theme on that and Wish You Were Here easily. This one, I'm reading as we're going. I don't mean to cut off Mad Eye because I want to but I'm reading that like the Three Little Pigs specifically referenced exact people. I mean, it was very difficult for me I feel like you need the context of like living in Britain at that time because it seems on the nose at times, which is very weird for Pink Floyd because that's not normally how they are. But yeah, I'll revisit that in a little bit. But Matt,
and that's kind of what that's what Roger Waters was trying to do, right? He was trying to kind of follow a little bit of the model of what the punk movement was doing. And yes, Josh, you're right. Like Dogs and Sheep were songs that they kind of like had already, like the Dogs was originally titled You've got to be crazy, right? It's like the opening line to that. And Sheeps was like drooling and something else. There was a different title for it, but then they realized what they were going to do with the concept, and then they reworked the lyrics. So, I mean, to me, this is a much more guitar driven record for Pink Floyd. You've kind of got Gone are kind of like there's still production here. It's still Pink Floyd. It's still a very produced record. But Gone are the synths. Rick Wright to me is definitely taking much more of a backseat here, and Gilmour and Waters are much more up front with the guitar sounds as an overall whole, especially compared to something like Wish You Were Here, which had Rick Wright all over it with a lot of the synths and stuff, and also Dark Side of the Moon, which was a lot of different sounds going on. So in some ways, this is more straightforward, even though they're long songs, 17 minutes, 11 minutes, 10 minutes, and they do have different movements and flow in and out of different parts. So it's a prog album for sure. But it's bleak, this is like, and it's not just in the lyrics, you could just tell in the sound of it. This is like a bleak, darker type of sound. And sometimes it's hard for me to get into it, but I also feel like when I am getting into it, I'm really, feeling. I just think that there's great guitar parts in here. There's great guitar solos. There's cool little breakdowns that they're doing, it kind of does sometimes fade into like the background. It kind of just plays. It's not like without a ton of moments that stand out at me. But for some reason, I'm still really gravitating towards it. I really like it. It's one of my top 3 albums. I probably would put this, with this and top 3 Pink Floyd albums, along with Wish You Were Here and Dark Side of the Moon. Like, I think that this run of albums, these 3 in particular, are my favorite. My favorite Pink Floyd records. It's. But I would say that I probably feel the other 2 maybe more. It's hard for me to say because I think that they all have distinct feelings and distinct, like there's definitely a trajectory here that the band is going in. And that's one of the things I like about them. I mean, there's versatility here. There's a lot of different things going on. But I think maybe one of the downsides of this, it does feel like a darker type of sound, and it's a little bit more pessimistic, which sometimes I'm not always in the mood for. But I think when I am able to kind of really listen to it, I really do feel myself getting into it, like with the guitar solos and some of the breakdowns, which I think are pretty strong. There's cool effects here too. I think they do the talk box like that. Yeah. What is it in Pigs? They do the the Peter Frampton
talk box. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. They're using that, so they've got those effects going on, yeah. So I do like it. I do like it, but I guess I thought you guys would like it a little bit more because it was more guitar driven. But I can also see what you're saying about kind of how it can blend together for you in the background. So
it just I don't know how to describe. Like I said, like I was pleasantly surprised, impressed, happy about the fact that the other Pink Floyd albums didn't blend into the wallpaper for me, which was my stereotype of it. This was the first one where I kept waiting for something musically that jumped out, almost like the prog albums where there'd be bits and pieces of stuff that you're like, ooh, look at what they're doing there, like in the Genesis or the Yes albums. This just never like rose to that for me. It was like, okay, like you said, the guitar playing was noticeable and fine, but not at a level where it jumped me in. And then some of the other things, the loss of the lead a little bit structurally for me, just I never had an entry point into this one. I think it was a very distant piece for me, not visceral. Yeah. And sometimes it's like it's the albums we listen to, right? Like the Eagles album welcomed you in. You might not have always loved it, right? But it had an inviting tone to some degree. And the Van Halen one like basically says, hey, come join the party. This one sort of was such a different vibe, and maybe that was part of what it was, like the company it kept this week. So
it's almost like, to me, hearing you talk about the idea behind is the politicism got lost in the music for me. It's like almost too oblique or something. It's like they realized that punk albums were political, but one of the things about like the Clash and stuff is you kind of know what they're talking about right up front. And I didn't get that in this. And that's not to say that you can't be more, subtle with your message in the music. But again, it just didn't work. It wasn't there.
I think what it is for me, if you're going to channel the punk is so much like an extroverted, outward social experiment, and Pink Floyd to me is very inward looking and introspective, and it's hard to like do a societal critique from this introverted, introspective way of doing music, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
I think that's whereas like the introverted, maybe not introspective, I think might be the other, like sort of self-evaluation, I think. And it's just very hard when you're trying to capture a movement to kind of come at it. I mean, that's my argument a little bit. Some of the argument I have with this album is a little bit of what happens to me with like Rush sometimes. I love the music, but the music seems disconnected by these themes I'm supposed to get. And it's like, well, that's like sort of okay, but I'm not getting that at all in terms of the sonic palette of the music, and I think it's maybe like an emotional and evocative feeling that I don't get when they're trying to, like when you're writing about isolation and desolate, things, and Syd Barrett, right, and losing it, these things all click in sort of the sonic palette. But when you're writing about a social critique of sort of the underclass, you know what I mean? It doesn't come across in the sonic palette to me a little bit. And so that's always hard. Now, we're going to do The Wall next, right? Which I haven't listened to in forever. And of course, certainly he takes those themes and goes deeper into it. But even The Wall, Matt, from what I remember, combines sort of some of those ideas, but also with, youth, and isolation. And I just feel like it's an easier theme sonically. So
yeah, well, there's like more of a story. Yeah, Again, the story, I was doing the research. I mean, I knew that this was kind of like a class, like a criticism of the class system, and the play on Animal Farm and stuff like that. I again, even when I did read the lyrics a little bit more, I'm not the lyrics guy, but I do feel like the music here, it does kind of convey that. There's something interesting about this record that the music does, and it's interesting that two of the songs were written years before this, right? Before this was even like this was an idea or the concept in Roger Waters' head that he wanted to do. But that this music really kind of evokes this kind of like dystopian type of society or place, and it's a little menacing. It's dark. It's eerie, right? It's kind of almost like spooky in some ways. Yeah. But I don't know. For me, it's a really unique record because it works, but it doesn't necessarily work all the time. But when it doesn't work, it's not like I'm going, God, I can't listen to this. It's, I've used dystopian before to describe. I think Kraftwerk had some songs I thought like, man, this is dystopian. And it's like almost got to the point where it was uncomfortable. I don't feel like this album was ever uncomfortable to listen to. I just think that sometimes it does blend into the background. But when I pay attention to it, I see way more into it, obviously. But yeah, you're right. There's no like big hook on this. There's no guitar solo like there is in Time from Dark Side of the Moon, which is just like when I hear that, I'm just like, oh my God, this is awesome, right? Or it doesn't have this like ethereal kind of like keyboard part like on Shine On You Crazy Diamond, or just like a basic pop, ballad like Wish You Were Here. So I think that maybe I might like those other two albums as a whole better. But this is a unique record for me because I really do like it, but it's not. But it doesn't just jump out at me as being. I don't know. It's real. I'm really having a hard time like really verbalizing how it makes me feel, because
it seems like you were able to tap into the emotions it was trying to.
I definitely could hear that in the music for sure, and maybe it's one of those things where sometimes like I'm okay with those emotions or hearing that, and sometimes I'm like, okay, I'm not really there right now, but when I'm not there, it's not like, God, I can't turn this off. I'm not, I'm not ready for this right now. So it's a fascinating record for me, but I will stand by. I think when I think about the totality of their catalog, these three records, the ones that we just covered, Dark Side, Wish You Were Here, and this, these are my favorite. These are the ones that stand out to me as the best overall albums that they have.
See, to me, those other two stand above this album. I feel they're more fully formed products. And I would even go so far as to, I think there's more interesting things in Saucer Full of Secrets for me personally than there are in this one. So, but it's not.
I'm interested.
I'm not down on this album. I think it just falls into that, like, I call it Pink Floyd, like space out music, and that's a little bit what this was. It was space out music, but without the feeling. It was. Does that make sense? Like, it's spaced out, but it didn't like put me in a thing where I'm spacing out, but in this way where I'm really content. It was more space out and how do I get back in, type music.
Yeah. But it's emotional too. That's, it's like some of those guitar licks that like Gilmour's playing. It's some really, emotional stuff. It's just maybe sometimes I'm not feeling it as much because I'm not ready for it. But it'll be interesting to cover The Wall, because that definitely, it could, the whole like isolation and, dystopian type feel certainly continues on with The Wall. And that's a double album.
Wall, I'll say, but I always got that as like youth, and basically, I mean, all the way down to like the kids being fed into the meat cutter, right? Like the meat grinder, like the classic. That to me, seems to be,
well, it's also
a
like
big piece of that, yeah.
It's also detachment, right, and lack of connection. I mean, The Wall, right, itself, but it's
which is what Pink Floyd sounds like, but so it absolutely fits when it's that. It's like, ooh, okay,
But but there's a lot more songs on it. Like there's a lot more like 3 minutes. There's not like 12-minute songs on that record, really. So
it might be my favorite Pink Floyd album ever then. Listen to it, so yeah.
Maybe. So, but yeah, it's interesting too. I'm going to talk more about the albums, the Animals tour. that they did behind that, because there's a lot of things that happened on the tour for this record that inspired The Wall, and some really interesting, funny stories that came out of that. So we will cover that next time, probably in a couple weeks, right? Whenever we cover The Wall, that might be one of the last episodes. I think that's like late 1979 or something.
Yep.
Yeah. It's gonna be our second to last episode, maybe
penultimate, Josh.
Of the.
That's what that's.
Well, yeah, we'll see. We'll see with the numbering and how many albums we get to. But yeah, it's towards the end.
Well,